Well, good morning, everyone. For those of you who I haven't had the pleasure of meeting, my name is Valerie Moses. I am FPRA Orlando's president-elect and VP of membership, and just so excited to have you all here. I think it's going to be an amazing conversation and can't wait to dive in. Before we do, I do have a few announcements for everyone. So first, I want to welcome, we have 3 new members who have joined us. So Alyssa White, Gabriella Hart-Murgo, and Crystal Ruiz, welcome. And if any of you are not currently members, you know who to reach out to after today. So definitely reach out. We would love to have you join us. Thank you to our members who recently joined. We also have some celebrations, some congratulations in order. So I first want to recognize Despina McLaughlin, APR. She is our nominee from our chapter for the Joe Curley Rising Leader Award. Every chapter has a nominee and they're presented at annual conference in August. So we'll find out who is the Joe Curley Rising Leader for FPRA. But again, Despina is our local nominee for the Orlando area chapter. So congratulations, Despina, great job. We also want to congratulate Lindsay Hudock, APR CPRC. She just became a certified public relations counselor. This is an incredible credential that just demonstrates her commitment to the public relations profession and her work in counseling others through communications and PR. If any of you are interested in pursuing your credentials, please reach out to us today or anytime after this presentation, and we're happy to get you connected with some resources for that. So congratulations to Lindsay and Despina for these amazing accomplishments. We love to celebrate our members, so make sure you're sending your accomplishments our way so we can recognize you in the next program too. We also have some other amazing events coming up in the next couple of months. So in June, we have our media mashup. This is going to be on June 21st from 7:30 a.m. to 1:30 p.m. We're going to be at Ace Cafe in downtown Orlando. It's a wonderful event that we host every year in partnership with PRSA Orlando. We'll be networking with journalists. We're also going to hear some amazing keynotes and breakout sessions. But the focus is going to be on the tried, true, and new of communications. So we're going to look at some of the traditional PR, traditional skills that we all need to have to be better practitioners. We're also going to look at some of the emerging trends in the industry. So it's going to be a fantastic day. Sign up. And in July, we'll be hosting an event with Experience Kissimmee. More information to come on that, but this will be on July 18th from 8 to 9:30 a.m. Please save the date. FPRA annual conference is from August 6th to the 9th, and it's in Orlando at the Waldorf Astoria. Please register if you haven't already. We'll have a great group of Orlando area chapter members there, so make sure to let us know if you're coming, and more information on that soon as well. But you can go to the FPRA website to register now. And then finally in August, we will be hosting our FPRA Orlando board installation. We don't have a date just yet. It will take place toward the end of August, but we'll be celebrating all of the brand new board members and returning board members for the 2023-2024 term. So get excited for that. The details will be announced soon. So now I want to turn it over to our speaker for today. I want to welcome Melissa Vela-Williamson, MA, APR, and APR CDP from NVW Communications. I cannot read today, but Melissa is an accredited, internationally recognized public relations expert, national industry columnist, podcast host, and author. With 2 decades of multicultural and integrated communications experience, Melissa serves as a consultant, trainer, and account director at her boutique firm, MVW Communications. She has directed communication efforts for more than 90 organizations. With unique experience in internal comms and DEI, Melissa leverages her PR expertise and acumen as a certified diversity professional to create social good. And she just wrote a book, Smart Talk, Public Relations Essentials All pros should know, and it was published in October. It's a fantastic read. I recommend it to everyone. She can share more about how you can get access to that. And without further ado, I want to turn it over to Melissa.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Valerie. Thank you all at FPRA for hosting me. And you're already such a supportive group and a wealth of knowledge. Like I just learned about the CR CPRC credential. I'm like, what's that? Tell me all about it. So it's wonderful to network across the US with everyone. And I'm so grateful for everyone who made time in person and anyone who watches after the recording today, because that is the advantage of working with Zoom and virtual, right? Is that we can do it asynchronously and keep up with all the new. I love that. The tried, true, and new. So what we're going to talk about today is some new ideas that I put forward in a lot of my Public Relations Society for America columns, but as well as what I write about and talk about as a thought leader and content creator. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up my handy dandy presentation. I'm rocking two screens here, so just give me a second as I adjust them. Sometimes my Zoom disappears and then I can't see what I'm doing with my face, and that's disturbing to me. So we're just going to jump on in. So I'm going to give you 5 different ways to incorporate more inclusive communication in your professional communication work. So whether you do a lot of public relations, or you're more on the marketing side of things, you do a little more social media strategy, or you're doing, like most of us, a little bit of everything, we want to make sure how you're approaching it is in line with how people appreciate being communicated with, for sure today and absolutely tomorrow. So I'll just give you a little quick background, and thank you for the bio. All of this just basically says I've been doing work in the industry for 20 years, really had a great broad experience, but very deep into certain categories or sectors, as a lot of us have as we grow in our career. So I've had my own boutique firm, MVW Communications, since 2015. There's a great backstory for that I talk about in my book, and in a lot of ways that I talk, particularly with different diverse pros, right? That you can be a business owner very simply with a low budget, and you can keep your agency very nimble. And it can be quite an advantage, especially during turbulent times like, a global pandemic. But I love being my own boss because I control a little bit more about how I design my career and where and how I work. Because if you work in communication and PR, it's pretty dynamic and things change a whole lot, right? So if anyone wants advice on being your own business owner, let me know. I'm happy to share just a little bit insight there. But I work really hard to make sure that I have the right credentials, and I go after awards in the industry to really be peer review, because I learned most of my work about public relations on the job in the field. I had one class on public relations as an undergrad, and so I've tried to make up for that the rest of my career. But I say that to kind of preference some of the comments I'm going to make during my presentation about some of the, I think, chips on our shoulders that we have as individual pros, and some of the things we need to think about when we're communicating with diverse populations because of our different backgrounds. But my specialties are definitely in integrated marketing communication. And I certainly believe integrating inclusive comm and DEI is the next step in integrating marketing communication work, right? Taking the best parts of all kinds of communication to put together our campaigns and plans. But we work with a ton of entities that want to use PR and marketing for social good. So that's nonprofits, education. I'm really getting in depth in my expertise around the Hispanic Latino cultures, and I keep researching how our groups are changing every day. And then I've worked in a corporation and certainly do a lot of community service and pro bono volunteerism to kind of pay it forward for all of those who've helped me in my career. So why am I talking about this? Well, it's been pretty interesting. I think if you really look at your career as a bunch of different opportunities and stepping stones, when you look back after a while, you'll kind of see connection points or a through line in what you've been doing. And that leads you to understanding what you value, or maybe what you're uniquely good at, right? And I think there's a lot of exploration a lot of us have to do, because we tend to be, particularly for people of color, the first generation PR pros, or maybe we're the first generation college graduates or master's degree graduates, or we're pioneers in other ways. But it's been interesting for me to look back and say, well, why am I doing this kind of work? And why did I get certified as a diversity professional? Where did this come from? Well, I actually worked with culture and cultural strategy and DEI for the majority of my career. It's been a through line to try to be a supportive, unifying advocate in every job I had. So I really started my career as a freelancer on top of a full-time job of being a grant writer right when I got out of college. It was the only communication job I could find. I wanted to work in PR after I learned about it from a student in my last class of undergrad school. So I really didn't have connections. So I started working as a grant writer for a very small nonprofit, but a spin instructor that I knew at the gym, as I was telling everybody I wanted to work in PR, said, "Oh, my wife has a small firm. You should check in with her. She works with freelancers." Well, what's a freelancer? I didn't know. I mean, this is 2002. We didn't have the gig economy we do now. But that's how I got started. I was freelancing on the side. I audited a college class as a graduate with a bachelor's degree. I audited an undergraduate class about writing for PR after I realized I didn't know the AP style. But my first shot was a firm as small as probably mine is. It was a Hispanic-focused PR firm where we would connect with more general market, as the industry called it then, and I think they still call it now, which translated into English-speaking kind of monolithic strategy for probably predominantly white, avatar of a customer, right? But we were the Hispanic arm of a lot of different bigger agencies. And so we would culturalize what we were doing and think about, well, how can we take this campaign and make it work for the Hispanic and Latino community? San Antonio is the largest Hispanic majority city in the US. And a lot of our basis comes from, our families, friends, and the natural migration from Mexico. But we have a lot of different Latino groups here too. With that, just basic numbers, it made a whole lot of sense for me to understand what drives Hispanic people to purchase things, volunteer, help out, right? Get involved. And so that led to me doing multicultural marketing and PR work at Big Brothers Big Sisters, where I recognized very quickly, hey, we've got a lot of Black little brothers waiting for Black big brothers. Why is that? And what can I do about it? And the same thing for Hispanic little brothers. And diving into that led me to really put together some very unique campaigns that the visuals I created in my Everyday Heroes campaign, where I just identified some of our best real life big brothers and big sisters to take photos of, to take video of, to get testimonies from, to put in media relations, story opportunities. They weren't doing that at the national level really in the same way. So even today, and this has almost been, this was back in probably 2005, I'm still running into images that we shot here out of San Antonio. So I say that to say, it doesn't matter. I was very young when I did that work. If you're thinking about the real life community you serve and visually you're not serving that, that's really low hanging fruit in our industry. And it can make a huge impact and how people believe they can be the right big brother, big sister, the right volunteer, the right employee for your organization. Because of that work, I felt that I could transfer those skills into doing actual diversity and inclusion work and getting my way into a very well-known corporation here in Texas, but highly regarded in the grocery industry, H-E-B. And H-E-B is known for tailoring its offerings, its storefronts, its colors, its every palette piece you can based on the community and the zip codes and the demographics and the real graphics of the people there. So I saw it as just multicultural PR that was more expansive than just race or ethnicity. I was now working with LGBTQ plus groups. I was working with women. I was trying to support people with disabilities and older neighbors. And it all really just felt like really good PR. So I want to let you know that that's kind of the background, right, that led me to this work today. And you can find, if you look through, like maybe there's something that is really attracting you to the work that you're doing, and it's going to become, an advantage for you and a differentiator, right, as we go on our careers. So with that background and working in DEI for a corporation, that was a privately held company. So it was more of a PR goodwill work versus a human resources work. Eventually I came from there, went back into agency life and started my own, but the lessons I've learned and the care for people have come with me. So that starts me talking about number one, my first tip in getting more inclusive with your communication is we really need to embrace people as they are today and where they're going tomorrow. So a lot of the information you hear me talk about is what the US population looks like, because we're based, this chapter is based here in the US, and we want to make sure that we're working with all types of people as they really live and work and love. So it was quite amazing if you had looked at the last US census stats, even with an undercount of the Latino community. For it was quite apparent that we are a more multicultural society than ever. More than likely, someone's going to identify as multicultural if you were to pick them out in the population than white, because for the first time in history, the white population actually decreased as a whole. And the major growth continued to happen with the Latino population, but also Asian grew a lot, and just multiracial people who identified. It was very enlightening to really look at that and see how people self-selected their identity. And that is the new through line, I think, for today. And that we can't prescribe who people are and the identity markers for them. And we shouldn't have done that in the first place, but we certainly shouldn't do it as communicators, and definitely not do it anymore. Hispanic or Latino population led that growth, and we continue to lead that growth as a trend with 23%. But what was also interesting in terms of terms is that the census officially dropped using the term majority and minority. Sometimes you'll hear me use it just because it really helps explain things. So I absolutely believe, as a professional communicator, look for a term that is not offensive, but helps clarify what you're trying to say. So while I'm still gauging public sentiment, I can tell just using the words majority in terms of quantity helps people understand things sometimes. But it was really interesting that they want to use that as an adjective of identity, right? Because like in Texas, well, Texas, for the first time ever, the Hispanic population was absolutely equal with the white population. So Hispanics are no longer a minority in Texas. And so what does that mean as far as using that minority as a less than, right? Well, that's not happening here. So what happens now? This would be really interesting. But just know our population is all about the fusion, integration, multi, right? We all have multiple parts of our personality and our identity, but even in terms of what's passed along genetically is different based on just how people report. But some disparity is there, and we think about who's communicating for people. PR people have a ton of power and in some ways leverage and privilege when we are helping shape how our society views different opportunities and causes and corporations, really. But only 24% of working pros are people of color, which means our numbers aren't matching the reality of who we serve. And so a big part of my passion is just making sure, especially with the book, why I wrote it was to invite more people of color into the industry, no matter what their degree was, like me, if they didn't have the right one, and help them become leaders in it too. So just for clarity, I want to make sure to leave you all, and anyone who wants this deck, please email me. I'll drop my email in the chat at the end, and I'll make sure to give you a copy. But race is different than ethnicity. So first, as communicators, we have to use the terms in the right way and help our workplaces do so too. This is a whole lot of language, but basically just understand that by and large, race is what's passed down to us genetically, right? There's nothing we do or self-select about that. And then, of course, that concept was not something that everyone agreed upon, right? How we call different races things. So that's why it's kind of being replaced a little bit more in sociocultural concepts and work with ethnicity, because ethnicity is what we kind of adopt, right? It's based on our cultural practices, our perspectives, and the distinctions that kind of set us apart as people. And that's where I think things got a little more multi in terms of the census results, right? So culture, religion, language, that's ethnicity. So when you're using those terms, you want to think about that too. So now that we understand, okay, well, people have definitely changed. It's not that we are changing, we are changed. Well, we want to start wading into inclusive comm work and DEI work, which is very much tied together. Let's wade into that pool with culture and infusing our work with culture, right? So we all know probably on this recording and the Zoom is that public relations is way more than media relations. I know we have a former journalist or two on this webinar, but absolutely, right? People think, oh, it's just media relations, but we do so many more things. To me, and I write about it in the book, is that it's more about that public relations people first, win-win point of view. But that strategic communication process means that we should be building relationships, number one. And why I bring that up is a key way to build relationships is to really unite with people on what they care about and how they like to live life. And so what is culture? Well, culture is really how we experience life as a group, right? Everyone was born into some kind of family dynamic, and no matter what that looks like for you, there was some kind of cultural values and the way you ate and what you ate and when and drink and music and entertainment and how you celebrated different experiences or holidays. Like that was something that a lot of us are born and learn as children. And then as we grow, we have the opportunity to learn more, travel, move, have different relationships that give us ideas on how else we might want to live as a new group, right? So even PR people are a different group, and how we get together and what we dress like when we go to industry events and how we connect and what's the appropriate way to network, that's a cultural expression. So if we think about it that way, working with that cultural competence and understanding, okay, in this group, the shared values and the cultural behaviors that are acceptable is this, right? So I'm not going to show up at a PR industry event in my pajama pants and Crocs because that's not generally accepted in that culture. But just like I just did, a lot of times people get real twisted up in culture and say, oh my God, it's so different. And well, a lot of it is if we think about it and work with it, we can really do a lot to show appreciation and then connect with people's hearts through their culture. But one cultural difference I do want to point out, because not everyone seems to know about it, but I think a lot of the rub we get between people has to do with this aspect of culture, is around collectivist or individualist type cultures. And I learned about this early in my career when I was learning about advertising in the Hispanic and Latino community. And it was just a huge aha moment that I've taken with me. But when you're more brought up or subscribe to an individualistic type culture, that's a practice of putting your own needs first or an individual needs first, right? So that's where I think that feeling of pick yourself up by your bootstraps and having that autonomy and agency, feel like you can go to school in a different part of the country, or you can take a career no one in your family does and they have nothing to say about it. And when you feel that confidence in it, that's really some of the traits of that type of cultural expression. By and large, right, these cultures expression come from North America or Western Europe. So we see a lot of our white peers or white counterparts really living this kind of way. Counterpoint to that, in my family, for example, we were definitely brought up in a more collectivist culture where it was family first. And we were all kind of tied together as a unit. So you got to move as a unit, you go to the doctor as a unit, right? If anyone lived that way, you know that it's about the needs of the group first. So cultures that come from South America, Asian countries, for example, tend to be more collectivist in nature. So a lot of the groups that we have thought about as historically marginalized communities, or maybe communities of color, have been brought up in this way. And so that can have wonderful positive traits, selflessness, right? Group and social cooperation, where that family's central. But I did learn that, either one of these, and believe me, I pick and choose traits of these to just live my life as a strategic adult now. But there's pros and cons to both type of cultures, and you may feel some of the dynamic shifts in your organizations because of this. For example, at the nonprofit level, we would see a lot more white volunteers come through the doors, right? And I did a lot of research during my master's degree to say, why is that for majority Hispanic? Why are there more white volunteers coming every time I do a campaign that even shows more multi-ethnic people? And some of the problem was that the feedback I would get in focus groups, and I heard from my own family, was, well, why would you volunteer? Your nephew needs your time, or your sister needs your time. You need to help out within the family. So sometimes you're looking for a volunteer to actually be more individualistic and help in a different way that, they usually spend that time or only save it for family members, for example. And when we're playing and thinking about culture, we want to make sure there's a lot of talk about appropriation and appreciation, but the real difference is are that appropriation is when we're using cultural icons or references or making programs that, appreciation is respectful. Appropriation is that disrespectful way of using it, right? So that's when you're using an icon in a way that's stereotypical or negative. So this is a photo of a Indigenous Peoples Day event that I went to at a local university that was absolutely appreciation. They worked with local tribal groups and individuals to put on this event and make it authentic and respectful. This is an image of what we would consider as PR pros as appropriation, right? It is absolutely disrespectful to wear a Native American headdress and in this context. So we want to make sure when we're putting on our multicultural events or diversity events, whatever that is, hey, we can't have any ethnic stereotypes or jokes, right? Cinco de Mayo should not be done with a big funny mustache and a sombrero and ha ha he he, let's have a lot of margaritas. Like as PR pros, we want to think twice about something like that. Particularly using any sacred artifacts or decorations. And don't hold an event about a group or for your employee resource group or whatever without including members of that actual cultural group, where they can weigh in and share resources and ideas and see any blind spots that may happen. And, when you're doing appreciation events, then that's when you include, hey, is there a subject matter that can help with the planning or event activation? Can we house this at their museum or their property, their venue? Academics can be a great resource for this, or a cultural consultant for sure. So that's where we're thinking about respect and honoring and making sure it aligns with our organizational values, right? Not just jumping on a new trend when our organization is really not aligned with that idea. Values are a new segment that I want to share with you all, very forward thinking in PR, but values are a new way we can really think about how we start building those avatars of who we want to connect with as our stakeholders. So values actually inform the culture. It's what drives us to actually have these shared expressions, right? For example, the top worldwide value globally is family. And that comes together in a belonging cluster that David Allison has a wonderful book called Value Graphics, and where he says, we need to do away with demographics. It's about what people care about, right? What drives their behaviors. And so if you want to go forward and really approach this more inclusive and multi-fused society, it's right. Well, you know what? There's a lot of differences, but let's connect with what people value. So I promise you, no matter what organization you work with, if you did a campaign that had something to do with belonging, you're going to win. Something to do with family, it's probably going to be, something that's a safe space and would work. So how do we integrate these concepts and DEI a little more in terms of principles with PR? Well, again, first start with a good understanding of the terms. There's been research done on PR pros, and Institute for PR has shown that PR pros don't exactly know the differences between these terms. So I want to make sure I work those out for you. But just simply said, diversity, right? I think a lot of us understand that as appreciating the differences. So what are the characteristics or cultural practices about people that may make them different, but how can we think about that as more of that differences as an asset or strengthening our work or business, right? Equity, which is kind of newer to the group. In fact, when I worked in the corporation, it was diversity and inclusion department, D&I, not DEI. But equity is the work that I think that's really happening now in this space where we're like, there are imbalances. Let's just be real, right? We got to recognize there's imbalances of power or sometimes resources and provide, what is some shoring up we can do to provide a little more access or resources so that maybe everyone has a little better of a chance of succeeding, whatever that is. But that's the idea of around, can we offer some fairness, right, in terms of that? And then inclusion is really about including or leveraging the differences and doing the equity work to make sure that people feel like, yeah, we see your differences, but we value those and you belong as part of the organization and part of the conversation. So in some of the research I did, this type of cartoon has popped up in a number of ways across the globe, really. And it's this idea of here's the difference between equality and equity, which some communicators get confused about, right? So equality is everyone gets the same box to see over this fence and watch the game. And then equity is, okay, we're going to actually tailor a little bit more per each person's needs. Now, what's missing here is what I want y'all to think about is, well, truly, like, are we hitting that top value and that top target of inclusion and belonging? Like, to do that, we would actually have them in the audience, right? Or playing the game. And so that's where we want to strategically keep pushing our organizations to think about is like, it's really nice that you're doing this, but we need to get here. And then from there, we definitely need to get here, right? Or if you can jump that and have them belong, that's even better. But I do appreciate that sometimes we have to take baby steps with our organizations. And with ourselves, we have to think about ourselves first and starting with us and saying, okay, well, you know, how do we do this work? What are some barriers? Well, bias is a barrier. What is bias? Honestly, y'all, it's just a preference, right? So I like to approach DEI work and these kind of conversations with a whole lot of grace for humanity and say, look, everyone is built and we are wired naturally to look and be around people that are more like us. That birds of a feather syndrome, right? And that's why your parents may have told you, like, show me your friends and I'll show you who you are, right? Because who we associate with is often built on our preferences or a bias. And so what happens is people may have a bias towards, you know, I want to work with more women. I want to work with more Latinos. I want to work with more communicators. I'm more comfortable with this group. So we all have still our cave people brains, and we are very tribal still in nature. And so we have to work to override our wiring. And when we're doing our work and how we're advising our clients and saying, you know, there's a lot of sameness here for whatever that is, right? Or I'm noticing we're always doing something the same way. It's just a preference, right? So is there any othering where we're making someone feel like they don't belong, they can't contribute, they can't get promoted, that we need to talk about here? What is that about? It's not always about race. It's not always about ethnicity. Sometimes it's about classism, right? Sometimes these microaggressions or the and unintended small pokes we give each other or other people happen because people are just not comfortable. I've had a lot of really awkward comments come to me since I've become an author, typically from peers that are not like me. I'll leave that there, but that don't look like me or don't relate to where I come from or the city or whatever that is, right? And they say something that's, you know, a little offensive. I wrote my January column for PRSA about it. And you know, a lot of it is professional PR people, like we should not be the ones who do that. So we always want to think before we talk and we write and we post. But we can get started with DEI and help our organizations do that very carefully. So a lot of it is self-management first so that we can be that counselor and advisor, but how we act and write and create content like a pro really matters, right? So this is really interesting because it's a lot about treating others and thinking about our own management first. And two of the chapters I have in the book are act like a pro and think like a pro, because sometimes, hey, we're in these leadership positions and maybe we're the first of our kind, whatever that is. And then we make big mistakes, right? And that makes it harder for those coming after us as PR people or communicators or Latinos, whatever that is. So we want to think about our self-management so that we're not the hot mess that needs crisis cleanup after, but then also managing how we're working with the community, who's represented as the ideal big brother or mentor. This is one of the photos that I ran into at a conference that, I mean, I was delighted to like, wow, you know, and I showed this match because it was a Latino big with a white little brother. And I wanted to just, again, turn the tables on who could be the right mentor. And then making sure that we're advising others to work in that space. Because this is the one of the models that I put out in the book that says, you know, I just want to visually represent that this is very natural to PR. We should be intersecting with DEI as part of our work because good PR is about building relationships, right? If we appreciate and leverage differences and include people, it's going to build that relationship of goodwill. Will prevent issues when you do this kind of work, ethical advising or providing that equity. Reputation management is better. Sustainability for success, continued success of your organizations are going to be there if you're thinking a little more strategically in this space. And that comes back into inclusion, right? So there's inclusion communication and there's inclusion actual practices of how you manage and work with people. So we want to make sure that as we work with people, we're actually working with people as resources and having that diverse group as assets to our communication or campaigns or whatever we're doing as in our work. So inviting contribution from unheard or quieter voices is a big deal. And then making sure that we actually know who our target publics or audiences are, and communicating where and how they like to be communicated with, which you should probably know based on research, not just your gut instinct, right? We have to work extra hard, in my experience, to include and elevate women, particularly women of color, who are a little less likely, maybe because of collectivist culture, to raise their hand or differentiate themselves. And then looking for, a lot of this work, you're not going to make everyone happy. So you're just trying to get for a majority consensus on most matters, and particularly with the advice of those around you. And so doing this work, and the human part of it is really, we got to be allies. We got to be allies at work. We got to, what's an ally? Well, DEI terms I can see heavy and polarizing, but really allyship is just being a good friend. And so a good friend would invite other people in to join for lunch, to join in a campaign, to, bigger opportunities to join on your board, for example. We don't want to cancel people as PR pros. That's not our role, right? We're unifiers, bridge builders. Find that common ground. That's where we talk about values and culture. What do people care about? Elevating, helping share and promote others, and always be happy for them. I think that's a big deal. And you all are examples of that already. Using inclusive language, like I just did. Like, I shouldn't say guys, I should say all, right? And then everyone needs allies. And so just recognizing that, it doesn't matter what level of work someone's at or what their background is, everyone really needs that support. So knowing all that human behavior and the practice of that and where this all comes from, now it's really about the tailoring of your communication strategy. So I just want to leave you all with this idea that, look, diversity is a lot more diverse than we think it is, right? It's not just about ethnic preferences. It's not just about racial backgrounds. It's also about our communication styles. Some of us are very direct communicators, right? We just want the high points. Don't give me all the details. Some people are low context and, they just need a little bit. Some people need every little detail. And you want to tailor for that, even how you talk with each other, because that's sometimes where that rub comes. There's, just in terms of diversity work, like they will categorize, hey, there's more of what society thinks is a masculine approach to communication and directness and whatnot versus feminine. Now we know that's ideas being changed, but sometimes you will see different expressions, right? Or understand women tend to go small and sit smaller, at around a leadership table, around a table than men. And so there's ways that we can kind of accommodate or encourage other women to, get more voice, right? And more space. Of course, the different cultures I shared about collectivism and individualistic preferences. And then there's cultural diversity, as a lot of us think about, right? The different groups that we align with, as well as language diversity. There's a ton of language being spoken in the US. Now, our most dominant languages is English and Spanish. So making sure that with your stakeholders what language they prefer to read in and speak in and learn from is important, especially with English and Spanish. A lot of people ask me about that. I'm like, if you can go bilingual, you're serving more, right? And those are the top 2 US languages. And so that's helpful. But you might find in your community or in who you serve, it's not Spanish. It's going to be another language, for example. So you want to tailor for that. And then thinking about the differences in generational understanding and behavior, that's getting more fluid. That's where the value graphics come in, where someone in their 60s today doesn't act like how someone in their 60s, acted decades ago, right? So we also want to disarm any of the discrimination around that or bias. And then educational diversity. Y'all know that only about 30% of the US population reports to have had a bachelor's degree, right? So the majority of us working in this have bachelor's degree at least. And so we're writing more academic or more smart, and sometimes even more than that, right? We're all the way up to PhDs or whatnot. For a majority of the community, 70%, who are probably more comfortable reading at a lower level, like 5th grade level, right? 4th grade level. I know at HEB, we had a very diverse population, so we would make sure that we accommodated for that. And that comes with the more heart of this talk, which is now we're getting into like, well, what are the inclusive communication practices, Melissa? Because you got me all stirred up and now I'm worried, right? Well, it's first, people are super highly visual. We're visual creatures. That's why video is king on social media and whatnot, right? So you want visuals that actually help complement your copy or what you're trying to say or do, and really illustrate, like I did with the big brother, big sister reference, like the ideal or true mentor or hero or unicorn that you're looking for as your customer or your client or your volunteer. So this photo is, I've surveyed probably thousands of people now. And I'm like, what do you think that means? This was a photo I took of a graphic I saw during kind of the height of COVID in an outdoor mall here in San Antonio. And washing your hands like you're giving candy to a baby still doesn't make sense to me. Like I stared at that and I'm like, why would you give candy to a baby? You can't give candy to, I mean, like as a mom, right? All my red flags are going off. But that's just a great, funny illustration of like, that didn't help the COVID campaign when we were really desperately trying to educate people about washing their hands and changing behavior there. So making sure your visuals actually help is important. Plain language, right? Even though that's pretty plain because of the way it's worded, it doesn't make sense. Very literal, obviously not. Readability, right? Still confusing, but again, bring it down a level, make it easy to understand. If you don't want to speak in acronyms or academic-ese or legalese, but bringing it down to a lower level is always helpful. Person first language is very, very important, especially as you're working with different populations, people with disabilities. I have a client that helps serve people experiencing homelessness. That is a people first way of explaining versus me saying the homeless or homeless people, right? So our language is really trending in that space. Outdated terms, just like I mentioned, out majority, minority, things are changing, right? Used to be people said Oriental versus Asian population, right? So we have to keep up with the changes and where people's public sentiment is at. I'm highly watching the terminology around the Hispanic Latino community, and it's really interesting where people were like getting a little rowdy, a little wild about, well, you should use Latinx. And I'm like, let me look at the data, because I just want to make sure the data says people like and appreciate that term. And Pew Research Center, which you can check a whole lot of great data on different populations, was like, no, it was like 3% of people know what that is and less adopted it. And then here comes different organizations from the Latino community saying we hate that term. So terminology is a big deal. So that's why we want to tailor and go gender neutral if we can with our language, and make sure that we're thinking about accessibility needs when we're putting together pieces. Again, depending on your audience, right? We have to make sure we tailor for our audience. And part of that change in expression and identity terminology has to do with how people are using or not using pronouns, right? So if we understand, well, we should not prescribe identity for others. This is obviously part of the conversation. This is my son, Logan, and we were at a cool, like, interactive museum. And this was, I thought, really interesting. It's like, well, what color are you, right? What hue are you? What do you identify with? And they had different descriptions. Let me tell you what, he grabbed like every single one of them. It did not matter. And I thought that was so poetic about how people are. They're like, it just depends, right? So if we understand that no group is all the same or monolithic, then we're just wanting to tailor based on the individuals or the audience groups we're with. So for example, if I came in and was watching culturally how you all put your names or your identifiers on the Zoom. So if everyone had pronouns, I would put in a pronoun. But what we want to do is people, especially depending on our organizations, is really read that room and adjust the practices for that group and make sure that they feel proud, represented, and respected, right? So for example, they or them is considered neutral when you don't know what someone's preference is. First names, really easy. Research says that people love the sound of their name. That's why we have so many personalized things, right? So if you're ever unsure, or your client is, just, what is their name? Use their name, and then you can see how they identify themselves as you go on. But making that space for people to share their pronouns, particularly if you're working with younger groups, I have noticed the college groups tend to use this a little bit more. Just adjust, right? We're going to tailor how we work with people. And then thinking about our language too, and saying, how do we I'm just making up a new word, deneutralize. That's not even a word, neutralize, right? Or, making sure that we have gender neutral language so that people feel like all kinds of people can do these roles or are respected. So I try very hard to say, use the Texas y'all or hi y'all or you all, right? Versus you guys or guys. And that's something that I still hear a lot of women do. And sometimes you're talking to a group of women, they're like, I don't see a guy in here, right? Now, again, I can't prescribe how anyone identifies even in a group of women. That's a bias or assumption I'm making, more of an assumption. But just understand, hey, you know what? Let's just look for more in that inclusive majority middle of hi, everyone, hi, all, job roles like firefighter, right? They, them, and then honorifics are really quite advanced in this space, but I've heard teachers not liking Mr. or Miss, they like mix, and that's a MX. So if you see that, that's where that comes from too. But again, it's this idea of taking that time to understand who you're working with and tailoring for them. So I have a chapter in the book about tailoring. And then finally, we want to listen, learn, and adjust, because this work will never be done. People change. The only constant in our careers is going to be change, y'all. So get ready, continues to change. But I just want you to know too, if you're doing this work, you are being a socially responsible professional, because when you intersect PR and DEI practices, the best of those practices, and actually, and then you think about, hey, in social responsibility, they care about ethics and ethical actions. They care about transparency and they care about respect. That's where all that comes from, right? Caring for the environment and sustainability. Well, all that works becomes the outcomes of this intersection. So I just want us to think about integration in that way and saying, hey, you know what? This becomes social responsibility when we're doing this work because it is having a societal impact. I can help make change, right? And I think that what's really powerful, because what I've seen more than ever is that representation really matters to people. Feeling included and invited in really matters. So as you're thinking about your slate for your board, right? That personal invitation, I see this in you, particularly with pros of color or journalists coming into the field or whatever, really matters and can make a difference in recruitment. Because all of this has to start with us, and we have to work from our insides out to be good advisors and good communicators. But integrating these practices are really going to help make change. I think it'll help you stand out as pros, a little more progressive and on trend for where we're going. But we're looking for that, civility, right? It's been pretty raw out there. But offering that grace and being appreciative. And we don't want to tolerate people. We want to respect people. So that's where we want to go to really be that change, right? And quit dreaming about it. And then in terms, I want to leave you all with some resources and tips, because DEI, if you worked in that space proper, can be quite taxing for pros, right? Because it is really hard, again, to make everybody happy, and you're not going to. So that's why we shoot for most people. But continue just doing research before you take any major steps in anything. Hire a consultant if you can, or academics, right? There's professors that will help you pro bono on some of this work. They have great research. And then I just put some resources here that, if you want to get certified as your own individual pro, I did mine through the Institute for Public Relations Center for DEI, but PRSA has a great free toolkit out there. AP Stylebook continues to change its terms and how we write things out in this space. And then, of course, there's a lot of different ways to do it. So I am just here to connect, be part of your friend group, your ally, and answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Melissa. And if anybody has questions, you're welcome to drop them in the chat or go off of mute, depending on what you're most comfortable with. One question I have with the incoming AI, ChatGPT, artificial intelligence, I know one of the things that we're often warned about are the biases there, because it is operating on human information that we're inputting. How can we make sure that we're utilizing these practices, and what are there any challenges that you foresee with artificial intelligence becoming more readily used by communicators?
Yeah, so the majority of communication work has been around this more monolithic general market approach that I talked about, right? So the content it's scraping, whether it's for art or it's going to be the content in our world, right? More the language, the copy that it's scraping is made by the majority of people who don't do this work. So there's going to be inaccuracies. There's going to be those mistakes that we have to strategically actually override as the human professional to do. So what I tell a lot of pros, particularly the younger pros, I'm like, look, we're still not in the automatic cars, right? You don't let a car drive you everywhere. You can't let this tool write for you either. Anything, I've got a lot of different copyright red flags concerns about it, but even in the DEI space, like it's just pulling out content that other people wrote. And if you use that without fact checking it, and how can you, because it didn't come with the sources, you're more likely for a mistake. So it's actually better to drive your own vehicle and learn, right, that work, because I think it's going to be that human heart and care that's going to make the difference in thinking about all this.
I think that's I'm terrified of the driverless cars. So I think,
Yeah.
I think that's an important point. Another question that I have, and again, anybody that would like to drop anything in the chat, please feel free. I think representation and including people who you're actually marketing to is really important. But how can we make sure that we're not tokenizing anyone? Or I think it can be frustrating sometimes when you're the one person that looks like you who they come to for every single question. How do we make sure that we're still valuing the people we work with and not treating a group as a monolith in that respect?
Yeah. So I kind of heard two things out of that question. One is, what if you're the only, or you're the one pushing this, right? What someone might see as an agenda, but so what if it is? Agenda's for good, right? What if you're the only one pushing that, or you are the diverse pro for whatever that is? You know what? Be the representation, right? Be the representative, help get more in, do a great job, and demystify things. I mean, that's exactly what I've been working towards, I think, my whole career. Part of how I got into this work is because people kept throwing me in the Hispanic bucket anyway. That was my professional experience, and I studied that in my master's degree, and I did that work because we're the majority here, so it made a lot of sense that numbers wise that I was able to move. Then, of course, personally, my lived experience could help, but that wasn't enough. So I think part of it is also thinking about that strategically and like, okay, how can I use this? If people are going to put me in this group or whatever, like, how can I use it as leverage and to help others? And then if they're coming to you, asking that question, for example, right? These kind of questions, and you're not the only, then you're like, you know what? That is awesome. And Jennifer has great ideas about that. There's just tremendous work in this space. I think you should chat with her. Do you have her information? Do you want me to connect you? Like, I'm that kindly aggressive about it, that giving people their honor and credit and passing the mic is really important when you have that advantage. So I literally have a section at the end of each chapter called Pass the Mic, where I'm like, hey, diverse pro who's an expert in what I just talked about, what is your opinion? And I think that's really, really important, is that when you have that leverage, like, use it for good, right? I think it can really matter. Jennifer, you had a question.
Yes. My question was in terms of, like you mentioned before, with the terms minority and majority, and the fact that in Texas now that was like at an equal number, right? I remember when I was doing my reporting as a journalist, and part of our guidelines from the National Association of Hispanic Journalists from a couple of years back was to drop entirely the minority label. And some of the suggestions that they had was using a majority minority, kind of like showcasing that it was a minority in terms of what people would see the Latino Hispanic community out there, because they were like an emerging community, still in smaller numbers, but growing. But in that sense, like in the numbers in Texas, or like in places like Florida, for example, where I'm at, that it's not still equal, but it's growing at a very fast pace. What terms would you use, and how would you describe that in your writing?
Yeah, and I, what I try to do, if I think that the sentiment may be shifting, like you're mentioning, and I mentioned before around majority minority, is like, how am I using that term? because in the English language, most of our words have like double, triple meaning sometime, right? So if I'm talking about numbers, right, and that's the adjective for the numbers, right, that can be okay. If I'm using that as an identity label, right, then that feels a little different. So that's where the majority minority, I'm like, no, I mean, if you're the majority, you're the majority, right? So that's why I think Texas is interesting. I would definitely look at the numbers because I know it was like California, same deal. Different cities, right, within the state are different. So I would just talk about the group versus like, why do you need to put a minority, a majority, or whatever? So context is everything, like it is in our world. So I would just think one step further about, what am I trying to say in this sentence? Is it clear? Is it respectful? And if I'm just trying to talk about the Hispanic population in Kissimmee, we'll just talk about the Hispanic population in Kissimmee, right? Versus the minority Hispanic, right? So we just want to think about that and say, okay, well, I hear you. Sometimes I will say in these terminologies, like some of the more academic people in this space, which don't really speak very well to workplace practice, try to impose terms on us. And that's when it's clunky and not accepted by the majority of people. That's when I really for sure let things go, right? So I think that just continuing to do research, I love Pew Research Center and, seeing, well, what did they use? A lot of times they'll use terms interchangeably too. So that's another strategies for like Hispanic Latino, because there's a big number of those in the US who like Hispanic more than they like Latino. And then there's more that like Latino. In fact, something just came out about how Brazilians self-identified on the US Census and they identified as Latino, but the census government for years have been like, you're not Latino, you're white. And they kept changing things on the whatever. It's amazing and kind of hilarious. But just know that even like Pew, right, they'll use Hispanic, Latino interchangeably. And so, I'm looking for, I might use a term and then use a couple other clarifying terms to help make my point.
Thank you so much.
I don't have a question, but I do have a comment. Thank you very much. This has been very insightful, and I think we need to continue to learn, because every single day there's change. And I thank you for your time, your expertise, and I encourage everyone, if you have time, to listen to Melissa's podcast. I listened to the entire thing on Spotify, and it's pretty good. So thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
And I have my notes here.
Yeah. Anything come up for anyone else? Another question? I see something in the chat. Gabriela, you've known me for a little bit. Anything surprise you or bring an idea or question to mind?
Yeah, first of all, thank you. I wasn't sure if there was time for one more question, but I learned a couple of things in my work. I work internally a lot, and I recently got the opportunity to work with our external partners and consulting a nonprofit organization. And so I was like, I have to attend. I have to understand how we can approach this work, and how can I also implement what you've talked about internally for the organization I work with. And something that came up for me was understanding that identity piece and remembering not to like that color hue thing. I've been to that. I think it's the Wonder Chamber or something. And it's so important because, and whenever you're trying to survey or just have focus groups, what I've seen our biggest challenges is that we have so many voices, right? Which is great, but the two majority voices, if you will, are almost polar opposites. And so it's how do we hear both sides, and how do we respond while also recognizing we have two very, very big, like opposite sides here in our work when it comes to the culture, what people want, what teammates need for engagement, and so forth. So that was an important thing that I noted. And if you have time, I'd love to hear if you have any thoughts around that, like how to navigate balancing that and just responding to that while still remaining inclusive in that process, because again, it's two very opposites.
Great points. Great question. Because you're pointing to something I did talk about. So I mentioned making sure you're including and getting the quieter voices, because a lot of the research I've done and what it says about most Americans, whether they're US citizens or not, right? People in the US, really live in the middle in terms of politics. It's really a case-by-case individual basis in how we feel about most things. So a lot of times it's the louder voices, pro or, con, either way, that try to speak for everyone else. And you have to factor that in. So since you literally have that situation, I have this with a client right now around disapproving a logo, right? Sometimes the best thing to do is take out that focus group type of strategy and say, you know what, we're not going to go from qualitative research and hearing and focus group and hearing around the table and letting the louder people influence the total group. Let's do quantitative research and let's actually survey and have everyone vote on something. And the majority or the most votes of something that is like the democracy way, right? Democratizing the system of saying, this is what you all chose. So I've done that in more sensitive, taking on an identity for an organization is even quite polarizing. So a tagline, a logo, whether you're going to adopt this policy or not, take it to a vote. You can use Google Forms for that. You can use SurveyMonkey for that. You show them the different options. You spell out the options. You make it really clear and easy to understand. You have them vote. And then that's been so great because I'm like, well, 46% of you all chose this. And the leaders, no matter how polarizing, they have a really hard time saying, well, I don't care. We're going to do it anyway. Right? Because they know they shouldn't, even if they want to. So take it to a vote.
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you all very much for your time today. If we're at time, I want to honor that for you all, Valerie, but I'm happy to stay on another minute or we can conclude here. And you all are welcome. You have my contact info. Email me, find me on LinkedIn. I'd love to be part of your network.
Melissa, thank you so much for coming on and for sharing with us. This has been such an important conversation to have. And I took, I think, like 10 pages of notes for your presentation. I'll definitely be taking you up for the slide deck, but thank you truly for coming on and for sharing all of this important information with our group today. And thank you all for attending.
Thank you all. You have a great day and support each other. Good work.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.